Steve, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Can't tell you how happy I am to have an opportunity to participate in this forum and to be your keynote speaker, though I have to tell you I'm a little bit intimidated as I look around the room, and more importantly as I listen to the discussions and the comments from Stuart and Dennis and Martin and others about what's been going on in the area of nuclear fusion. Normally, you know, for a keynote speech, it's something you do at the beginning of a forum, and I have to tell you, as I thought about this, I thought that's what I was going to do. I was going to be able to talk first, and then I could escape and have plausible deniability for anything I said that was stupid or dumb. But now it's going to be sort of revealed to all of you as I sort of talk after you've already given some of your remarks, and I show both a little bit of my ignorance, but also show to some extent how much synergy and how much I'm in sync with all the things that have been addressed. I will tell you up front, I'm not a fusion expert, but I'm not also a novice when it comes to nuclear engineering and nuclear engineering topics. Just a little bit of anecdote and background. I am a native of Washington, D.C., born and raised here in Washington, D.C. Went to school here, actually turned down an appointment to the United States Air Force Academy, and stayed locally here and went to Howard University, School of Engineering at Howard University up on 7th Street, not too far from here. And lo and behold, as part of my interest in engineering, particularly mechanical engineering, the mechanical engineering department of Howard, when you got to your junior year, had sort of a division, if you will, of two different disciplines you could go into for mechanical engineering department. One was aero, astro engineering. The other happened to be nuclear engineering. And we had a great professor there who, through his auspices and things he did for both the Department of Energy, as it's called today, and also the National Bureau of Standards, he was able to get for Howard a sort of a training reactor, if you will, that we had at our units there at the school. And so I, for some reason, even though I had great interest in space and aero activities and flying and those sort of things, chose to go into the nuclear engineering field, thinking that this is really the field for the future. And so I took nuclear engineering courses as part of my focus in my mechanical engineering department in my junior and senior year. Learned a lot, did a lot. I will tell you that one of the things I learned was a discipline from this particular professor who insisted that for those of us, particularly in the nuclear engineering department, he insisted that we learn the discipline of being good engineers, particularly those who may go into some sort of public job or work for some company, the discipline of being thorough and doing things very, very thoroughly and doing them correctly. So as a result of that, for every quiz we had, every test we had, every homework problem we had, there were only two grades, either 0 or A. And you got 0, even if you got a problem and the answer was correct, but you set it up incorrectly, or if you set it up correctly and the problem was not correct, either way that was wrong, that was not thorough, you got a 0. So all of us in that particular discipline in nuclear engineering quickly learned what it meant to be thorough, to be a thorough engineer. And I think that has set me very, very well throughout my 35 years in the United States Air Force, particularly working major research and development programs and science and technology program for the United States Air Force. The other thing in terms of appreciation for the nuclear field, in between my junior and senior year in the summer, I had a chance to be a nuclear reactor engineering intern out in Germantown. I'm not sure what it was called, ERDA back then. It wasn't DOE, but out in Germantown, working as a nuclear reactor engineering intern. And I remember quite clearly, part of the things that I worked on was doing heat transfer problems for LMFBR, liquid metal fast breeder reactors. And so, again, I got a great appreciation for the discipline, great understanding for the discipline. And then subsequently, when I graduated and got my both mechanical engineering degree, bachelor's degree at Howard, and got commissioned through ROTC into the United States Air Force, the Air Force immediately sent me to grad school. They chose New Mexico State University out in Las Cruces, New Mexico. where lo and behold, as part of their mechanical engineering department, they had a couple of professors who focused on nuclear engineering. And I did that, and my master's degree thesis was on a feasibility study of nuclear propulsion rockets for space applications. So somewhere in my genes, deep down inside, I got awakened a little bit in listening to the dialogue today is I want to call it fledgling nuclear engineer, but at least somebody who has an appreciation for the science and the art there. So while again, I'm not a fusion expert, I can tell you that literally because of this opportunity and what ASP is doing in this particular area, Steve, thank you, and Andrew for that, and everybody who's been a part of that, Brian and others who've been helping to support these efforts, you sort of reawakened a very strong interest area for me, and I look forward to working with ASP and anybody else to see what I can do in any capacity to help carry the ball a little further, and I've been very, very pleased at some of the comments you've heard. All of you and all of your predecessors and the institutions you work for, you really are the experts. We know that, and I applaud you for all of this, and I encourage all of you, both the things we've heard about today, perhaps the things we're going to continue to hear about throughout the day, or the things we're going to have an opportunity to work on in the future. I encourage you to continue on what I consider to be this very holy grail, a very noble one, of making fusion energy something that's very, very realistic. However, I'm not an novice. I can tell you from all the things I've worked on in the Department of Defense and some of the things I do today in other capacities, we have some real budget challenges. You're facing some of those today right now. And yet we cannot allow this fiscal reality, regardless of how painful it might be, to continue to squander the scientific leadership that the United States used to have in this area. And we have to make sure we continue or try to regain some of that as much as possible, and not let it be like some other areas of leadership that we've lost in space and information technology, some of the other areas that some of you have mentioned. We're going to have to continue to focus our efforts and continue to do as much as we possibly can so that we can regain whatever leadership we can and keep making strides. I think ASP, Steve, Andrew asked me to sort of participate in this kickoff discussion here because of my role as the commander of Air Force Materiel Command in the United States Air Force, and the opportunities that I've had to lead some very large research and development, science and technology project for the Department of Defense, including space programs in a large measure, and also what some of you used to call SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, or the Star Wars program, ballistic missile defense. I used to be in charge of that activity for several years, working for the Secretary of Defense. And I'm still involved in some capacities in helping the Missile Defense Agency. And if ever there's an example, if you will, of a large area that needed attention, that was very, very scattered and to some extent from a lot of different support and non-support throughout the public and the Congress. But I think it now today is on fairly sound grounds, if you will, in terms of a capability that the United States has. Missile defense certainly really falls into that particular category. And it took showing the Congress, showing the public that we had a real capability, which I think is one of the challenges that we have here with fusion energy. It took garnering the kinds of public and congressional support and understanding of the threat that we had against the United States from particularly national security perspective, which I don't see as being any different to some extent from the kinds of threats that you face in fusion energy. Maybe not as much from a national security perspective, but like Steve said earlier, it does have a national security impact to it, but particularly from leadership, world leadership. To me, this is an area that is too important for the United States to relinquish and depend on others around the world to do it for us, if you will, as somebody discussed in the earlier question and answer. So we need to do something about it. And while there is not a direct linkage, if you will, to fusion energy, when I look at some of the challenges that other organizations, other agencies are looking at for the future, the Department of Defense specifically, NASA as an example, energy. And energy sources and energy research and development are very high on the list of areas that both agencies realize they need to put some investment in, and are beginning to at least think about where the dollars should come from and how they might get dollars and focus them in different areas. From a DoD perspective, it's looking at the future. I'll give you a specific example. I serve on the Defense Science Board in the Pentagon. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Defense Science Board. Our Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, has given the Defense Science Board a major summer study focus for this year to look at technology and innovation enablers for sustaining military superiority in the 2030 timeframe. Just so happens that sort of coincides with some of the timeframes that you're talking about with Peter and some of the other things that you've addressed here. Though I have to admit, I, like some others here, think that perhaps we can do something a little quicker. Very happy to see Genesis sort of thoughts along those lines, along with John's comments about that. I think we can do things a little quicker. But one of the areas that the Secretary of Defense asks us to address as we look at technology and innovation for that time frame is energy. Energy for our bases, energy for our forces. And while I dare say he perhaps was not thinking of fusion energy, to me there's an opportunity, however, to perhaps look at some areas of risk, some areas of technology development, and in the fusion area that perhaps could be addressed by some of the things that the Department of Defense is going to be looking at for its needs for that same sort of time period. The NASA, coincidentally, is also looking at some challenges in that same time frame. I'm a member, like many of you, I'm sure around the table here, I'm a member of the National Academy of Engineering. I chair the Academy's Aeronautics and Space Engineering Board, and in March, the ASCB, along with the Space Science Board, completed a year-long study for NASA on developing a technology roadmap for space exploration for the 2025, 2030 timeframe for NASA. This roadmap was, in some respects, we feared it was going to be like the roadmap that was referred to that you've had in the fusion areas over many years in the past. There was a fear that it would be nothing more than a list of different technologies. We tried specifically to make it more than that, to make it a specific roadmap, a strategic plan for NASA on the kind of things that need to be addressed, the kind of risk areas that need to be addressed, and specific game plans and roadmaps on how to get there in order for the United States to sustain its interest in space technology and space exploration in the 2030 timeframe. And lo and behold, if not surprising, one of the major areas in that particular set of roadmaps is energy. And fusion energy is mentioned in that particular study that we provided to NASA. Now, I know NASA, just like DoD, is faced with the same budget constraints that we all are faced with in the country today. But at least, again, there's another possibility of an area where some things that are being done for NASA's needs in the energy sector may help address some of the either risk areas or other technology areas that are going to have to be addressed for fusion energy. So I hope that this community can figure out a way to take advantage of those two opportunities, if you will, where there are going to be some resources applied to them. I can't tell you how much, but there are going to be some resources applied to both DoD's needs and NASA's needs to figure out how can I leverage that to help some of the things we're trying to do in the fusion energy arena. So again, there are some opportunities there that I think need to be addressed. When I think about energy and the energy needs, certainly assuming that we in the future return to a more viable and healthy economic growth for the United States, and we all hope that's going to take place sooner rather than later. There's no equivocating that there's going to be increasing demand for electricity. We know that. The Energy Information Agency predicts that the American electricity production is going to have to increase by some 30% or more by that same 2030 time frame. And we know that we can't meet that demand through all the things that are being looked at today, whether you're talking biomass or solar energy or wind as a source of power, or clean coal, or fission nuclear energy the way we know it today. There are a lot of different things that can be addressed, and to me one of the more viable ones is fusion energy that needs to be addressed in some respects. When Steve introduced me, he mentioned a couple of boards I've served on. One I no longer serve on was a public utility in Dayton, Ohio. Dayton Power and Light, primarily coal burning facilities for the Dayton, Ohio region in central Ohio. DP&L was acquired by AES, which is headquartered here in Arlington, as some of you know, so I no longer serve on that particular board. But I know from my years of serving on that board that our facilities, our infrastructure for energy sources are aging, and they're aging rather rapidly. And it's no surprise that by 2050, it's pretty clear that a lot of the infrastructure we have today for power sources in the country are going to be at the point where they're going to have to be replaced, if not even way before that. And I'm hoping as people look at options for replacement of some of those facilities, that fusion facilities of some types, even if it's demo facilities, are going to be strongly considered to give us a leg up with where we need to be in the future. So there are a lot of things that are going on that I think have an opportunity to play into the needs that we have here, and that all of you have addressed to some extent. And the question, I think, that also was raised is whether or not the United States is going to be a leader of commercialization of this type of technology, or whether we're going to depend on others or just abrogate that leadership completely. I'm certainly hoping it will be the former. I think everybody around this room and everybody who has any knowledge whatsoever about fusion energy hopes that the United States will pick up the cudgels, if you will, to again try to ensure that electricity produced from fusion is going to be safe, clean, hopefully sustainable, but more importantly, viable with the United States as a leader in that regard. And as several people had also mentioned, another area that I think is so critically important, we've talked about it in terms of manpower, we talked about it in terms of the workforce. I'll use a generic term that we all use perhaps too much in today's environment without really understanding it. A way to stimulate STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics community in our young people today. Don't need to tell any of you about where the United States stands in terms of its lack of leadership in STEM knowledge, STEM proficiency, STEM education. We're far behind some third world countries, or countries we would have considered third world a few years ago. And I think the last ranking I saw of the United States and how we fall in that particular area is something like 28th, depending on who's counting at any given time, of all the major nations in the world. That's how far behind we are in STEM education. And this is another area where I think it is very, very apropos and very, very, to me, a strong imperative that fusion energy be one of the catalysts, if you will, to try to regenerate the STEM workforce and STEM interests here in the United States. There are a lot of different areas that are trying to do that. Some of them not so successful yet, though everybody is talking about it. But to me, this needs to fall in line with all the other areas that could stand, if you will, and definitely need to have a workforce, a future workforce that understands what science, technology, engineering, and math means relative to fusion energy. Unfortunately, you know, when you think about how are we going to garner the kind of support that we need, our normal way to think about it, and I'm sure Congressman Gordon is going to set us straight there in his comments, and we think about government, and we think about government alone. We're lamenting, if you will, the funding that's been cut from this area from the government. But I think in the kinds of imperatives we have in our fiscal budgets today, it's probably very futile for us to depend on government alone to be the solution to this kind of the kinds of issues and challenges. It's going to take a really public-private sort of partnership, if you will. And I said public-private, I'm including universities, academia, big and small private companies, in addition to the public imperatives and support to try to get the kinds of groundswell, if you will, to move us forward in this particular very, very important area. And particularly if we're hoping that the United States is going to be able to maintain or regain some sort of leadership. All of us are going to have to be involved to some extent or another. And we need a strategic plan, and I think I saw the seeds of one, or a couple if you will, from both John's comments and Dennis's comments. We need a strategic plan for fusion energy production that's going to really lead to a demo facility and the kinds of capabilities, the kinds of programs, the kinds of projects to really move us forward. That strategic plan cannot be just another roadmap. I think several of you talked about that. I think the last roadmap, the priorities, gaps, and opportunities roadmap submitted to the Fusion Energy Science Advisory Committee was about 5 years ago in 2007. I'm sure that document was a very, very viable one and a very, very successful one when you think about it, but it really didn't garner the kinds of support that's really necessary to keep us on track. And somehow we need to come up with a strategic plan that's going to allow us to do that. And having the kinds of partnership, public, private, academia working together, I think we need to try to figure out how we can come up with a strategic plan that will garner the kinds of support that is really necessary. I was sort of thinking, and as I was listening to some of the comments, and I listened to Steve's words about national security, think about the kind of programs that I've had a chance to work on in my